in Baltimore and take a break from all of the Ravens and the Terps enthusiasm, and they have a bye this week. And, of course, everybody getting ready to run off to London. Reminder, on Wednesday night, this Wednesday, we're going to welcome Ryan Jensen as well as right tackle Austin Howard out to Greenmount Station in Hampstead. We're going to have some crab cakes. We're going to talk some football. And the 1-0 Baltimore Ravens after a huge road victory in Cincinnati, but that's the good news. The bad news is the Orioles have been playing every day since the last time you realized they were playing, and they haven't won in a week. Luke Jones joins us here now on the back end of a mess in Toronto on Monday night. Close game, a decent start, which is very unusual for the Orioles. But in the end, they did fall to the Blue Jays, and Luke, it's not mathematically over, but it's, and I guess there is no quick death in this 17 wild card race, right? You can't say they're absolutely unequivocally done, but it sure smells that way at this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And they're just not good enough. It was great to see them go on the little bit of the run that they did. They got to the point where they were, a game out of the second wild card spot, and we've seen over the last week that they're not as good as the New York Yankees, and they're certainly not as good as the Cleveland Indians, which that's fine because no one is right now. That was very apparent as they won their 19th in a row on Monday night. But it's just, I go back to that Toronto series last weekend where, when we talked about it, I wrote about this at WNST.net, that it felt like the Orioles had to scratch and claw and work so hard just to get that split with the Blue Jays at home. Remember, a couple extra inning games, and they had to use their bullpen a ton.
1-0 Friday night game that went on all night, yeah.
You could see that the bats had cooled off from what they did in August, which, they were ridiculous in August. It's tough to expect them to continue to score at that kind of an extreme prolific rate. But in September, they've really looked like a team that kind of emptied the tank in that series. Yeah, they had the Machado walk-off in the Yankee series where he hits the home run off Betances, but beyond that, we've seen a team that in September hasn't pitched as well as it did in August. Even though they haven't, the pitching hasn't been all bad during this current 5-game losing streak. They've actually had a couple decent outings.
Look at the last couple games. They've lost 4-2, 3-2, 4-3.
Right.
Those are baseball scores, not some cricket scores that we've had around here.
Yeah, that's acceptable, especially understanding the standard of this 2017 Orioles club. You just know it's not a good starting rotation. So if you get some games where the pitching staff collectively only gives up 3 or 4 runs, you'd like to think you have a chance. But the Orioles have also, over the last 5 games, scored 3 runs, 2 runs, 2 runs, no runs.
Well, better pitching will do that to you, right?
Well, it's just, it will, but at the same time, if we're going to blame the Orioles pitching for not being good enough, you can't just give the Orioles offense a pass when they run into some decent pitching. And, it's not as though they've faced those teams' absolute best starters over the last 5 days. They actually benefited a couple times by missing a couple pitchers, but they're just not good enough. It comes down to this. You can keep looking at the wild card, and you can say, okay, well, mathematically, they go into Tuesday, 3.5 games out of that second spot. And really, when it comes down to it, there shouldn't be a second wild card this year. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the Minnesota Twins, who have lost their last 2 going into Tuesday's action. They're 5 games above 500. L.A. is 3 over. The Rangers 1 over.
Yeah, one of these teams is going to get 9 innings to go to Yankee Stadium and try to figure it out. And
against a team that's markedly better as far as the Yankees are 13 games over 500. So, it's mathematically, is it unheard of to think that the Orioles could make up 3.5 games in, with 18 to play?
Now 5 teams in front of them, by the way. I did the math on this.
Right, well, but 4 as far as for that second spot. If they reel off another 7-game winning streak or win 9 of 10, then that's a different story. But it's really difficult to envision them doing that again because we're seeing the same exact issues that we saw back in June and July start to creep up again, including some really bad defense on Monday night. They kicked the ball around like a Little League team
Castro's running the first base and doesn't turn around and look for the ball?
I mean, it's just...
It was outrageous.
I mean, you see Mark Trumbo in right field. I mean, we know he's not a right fielder. I don't know why he's even out there. I do know why. He hits better when he's playing in the field. I mean, he's not someone who has been particularly productive when he's a DH. Kind of conjures some memories of Bobby Bonilla back in 1996, I guess. But you have that. You have Adam Jones, who has had some issues in center field recently, which is really uncharacteristic of him. I mean, they're doing everything it takes to come up short. And I don't think it's a lack of effort. I don't think it's a lack of caring. I just don't think it's a team that's very good. When you've played 144 games and you're 2 games under 500, that's a pretty big sample to just say, well, you're not god awful, but you're not very good either. You're very mediocre. You're a couple games under 500. So, barring something completely unforeseen like another stretch where they win 8 of 9, I don't see it in the cards for this team. And about the only thing that you can say that they have some semblance of a pulse is, once again, as we've been saying for the last 2 months, none of these other teams are all that good either. But that said, you do have the Twins who are 5 over. You do have the Angels who have been hovering a few games over 500, even though they haven't been that great of late. So when your best argument continues to be, well, no one else is really that good too, you're not really making a convincing argument that you should be taken seriously as a wild card contender, and that's why they've fallen back here over the last 5 days.
I know Glenn Davis came to town last month as part of the 92 team. And by the way, I liked Glenn Davis. He used to do my show back in the day 25 years ago. Very nice, Christian, kind, generous dude. But, 30 years later, we still look back on that deal and say, what? At what point does Chris Davis enter the Glenn Davis conversation? All the money that was given to him, I know he's a nice guy, but this kind of year here, this is unacceptable for your $25 million guy. And as much as Flacco gets, a hard time about being the highest paid Raven and stuff, he did win a Super Bowl, and he is the quarterback and all of that. But this Chris Davis deal, there's a lot of term left on this. You know what I mean? Literally, there's going to be a lot of time to talk about the Chris Davis deal. At this point in the year, you have to look up and say, he's coming back and he's going to get 600 at-bats again next year. It is a really quickly depreciating stock, what I'm seeing from him personally.
I don't disagree with you, but what are you going to do? I mean, you're not going to be able to trade him. They're certainly not going to cut him, and they shouldn't. I mean, you're not going to eat that much money at this point. It's not as though he's hitting 170 and has 10 home runs and is striking out 250 times in a season, although I shudder to think that could be possible come 3 years from now. But this is why there are a lot of people who are saying that the Orioles don't need to sign Chris Davis. And it's interesting you make the Joe Flacco comparison. Let's face it, most of these big deals are done why? They're paying someone for what they've already done. Chris Davis hit 53 home runs in 2013. He hit 47 in 2015. This guy had a 4-year period where he was the best home run hitter in baseball. I mean, just go back and look at it. That's how many home runs he hit. But history generally tells us that when you're talking about guys who are 3 true outcome kind of players, guys that are going to strike out a lot, guys that are relying on their extreme home run power, that once they hit the wrong side of 30, things can decline very quickly. Ryan Howard is a perfect late or very recent example. Ask any Philadelphia Phillies fan how that deal was.
Well, I mean, look at Pujols. Look at Joey Batista here at this point. I mean, this is what happens to power hitters. It's been going on since the beginning of time for baseball players.
Right. I mean, we're talking about someone who, even in his prime, wasn't someone, he struck out a lot. He didn't have a great contact rate, but...
Well, then you bring Trumbo in and you have 2 of the same player.
Well, but the problem, the difference there is you're only committed to Mark Trumbo for 2 more years. I mean, this is Chris Davis. This is 5 more years of this. And you mentioned the Glenn Davis deal. I mean, it's hard to compare it to that because Glenn Davis was never productive for the Orioles, and they also gave up 3 young, cheap, controllable players that would have.
Yeah, he hit his 50 home runs in Houston. He never got that here. I mean, at least Davis hit his here, right?
Right. I mean, at least Chris Davis has been extremely productive here. But again, this goes back. This is why, and we're going to talk about the same thing with Manny Machado, even though it's a different story because Manny Machado's going to be 26 when he hits the free agent market, and that's a very different animal than what most of these lucrative deals are. But this is why so many sabermetricians tell you, don't sign these guys to long-term deals when they hit 30 or 31 years old. The reason why is they're going to be losers. Those deals are going to not be sound investments. If you're lucky, you're going to get 3 or 4 really good years out of it, and then you're going to be paying for it and then some over the next 5 or 6 years. Now, this isn't a 10-year contract, but we're talking about a 7-year investment, and that's not even considering deferred money, which makes it a little bit better in the short term, but whoever's owning the ball club at that point is going to be continuing to pay Chris Davis in a way like Bobby Bonilla continues to get a check from the New York Mets. But, I mean, it's just there's not a whole lot to talk about it, though, because what are you going to do? I mean, you're not going to cut him loose right now. They shouldn't cut him loose right now. You're not going to get anyone to take on that deal. All you can basically do is try to get it fixed. And I can tell you, this isn't something where Chris Davis is just going up to the plate and just trying the same thing over and over. I know for a fact that the organization has been trying different ways to get him out of this slump. And, Scott Coolball's worked with him. Howie Clark's worked with him. Other people in the organization have worked with him. He's taken extra batting practice. There have been times where he hasn't taken batting practice, trying to give him a mental day to kind of get out of his own head. They gave him a day off at one point not that terribly long ago. It's just, none of it's worked. And it's not even so much the contact rate as much, although that's certainly declined. But we've seen him take so many strikeouts looking where it's just, he's just a mess. He's lost. The only saving grace for him right now is that he continues to be a good defensive player. Maybe not a gold glover, but certainly someone that does save his infielders a lot of errors. But you're not paying someone $20+ million a year just to play good defense, unless you're talking about Andrelton Simmons kind of defense at a middle infielder spot. So it's frustrating, but this is where they are at this point. You just have to hope. And, we're not talking about a player who's 38 years old. So is it possible for him to have a renaissance if he does the necessary things in the off season? Sure. We're talking about a guy who's going to be 32 in March. It's not out of the question, but generally, this type of a profile of a player, a power hitter who struggles to make contact, does strike out a lot, generally that doesn't improve as they get older. It only gets more extreme, and we're seeing that.
Well, you see liabilities in the lineup for next year already, right? I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with Machado in the offseason. I'm assuming he'll be in the lineup on opening day. Same thing with Britton. Decisions to be made at the end of this year. There aren't a whole lot of decisions to be made at the end of this year, right? Beckham's going to come back and be the shortstop next year.
Right.
They're going to have to figure out pitching, but every year they have to figure out pitching, and every year they go sign some stiff like Jimenez or Gallardo, or they'll go get some fifth starter that used to be a number 1 or a number 2 and give him $12 million and have him come in here and labor to a 5.12 ERA in 26 starts or whatever. I mean, that's been the history of what we've seen here. I don't think there's any cavalry on the way coming over the hill, and I certainly look at the liabilities of this team, and I would have thought by now Adam Jones may have been going in the other direction. I haven't seen that yet. Certainly Trey Mancini has slipped into that spot where if you would have jettisoned Davis or Trumbo, you'd have a nice piece at that position. But now you have Trumbo, you have Davis, and you have Mancini all coming back next year, all play the same position. They're all the same player pretty much, right?
Well, it just comes down to this. Davis is going to be the first baseman. Mark Trumbo is going to be the DH, unless they find out a way to move Mark Trumbo, which that deal is not completely unmovable, but certainly not, based on what we saw in the offseason, this past offseason, wasn't a whole lot of vying for his services. So you have that, and then you have Trey Mancini in left field. I actually think the lineup looks to be in okay shape, especially with Jonathan Scope and Trey Mancini doing what they've done this year. Austin Hayes, I'd I'd make a bet right now that he's going to be their starting right fielder next year. That's how much they like this kid. That's how much Baseball America and other outlets are starting to like this kid, even though I don't quite get why they've called him up and he's hardly played. That doesn't make much sense to me, but that's beside the point.
Maybe moving him around the hotels and just being with the teams,
Yeah, I guess
a good thing. Well, look, they thought they were in the pennant race a week ago. Now they're not anymore, right?
Well, but that makes more argument for him to play, and Bowie was in the playoffs in the Eastern League, and they took him away from that, and he hasn't played much. I don't get that, but overall, I think Austin Hayes is a pretty good bet to be in right field. So, it's not as though they have a lot of positions to the side. I think what happens at the catcher position is quite interesting with Wellington Castillo having the player option. You know how I feel about his defensive work, his work behind the plate. I'm not enamored by that. I think the pitching numbers reflect that, but he's put up really good offensive numbers. So what do you do at catcher? If he opts out, your decision is kind of made for you. If he exercises his player option, what do you do? Chance Cisco, do you leave him at AAA another year? You could, or do you decide, we're going to take that money that Castillo would have made. We're going to go with Caleb Joseph and Chance Cisco, and especially lean on Caleb Joseph defensively, and then we're going to take that money to try to go get some better pitching. But you said it. I mean, the big question, as is the case every single year, who is going to be in this starting rotation? I mean, Bundy, all right, I'll check that box. Kevin Gausman, despite the inconsistency here in 2017, I'll check that box. Beyond that, who knows? I mean, do you try a one-year pillow kind of contract with Chris Tillman, and then if he looks like the same exact guy, the jet is in him next May? Maybe. Okay, that shouldn't be anything better than a fifth starter kind of an option, though, given the year he's had. We know Jimenez is gone. I'm guessing they're not going to exercise Wade Miley's option, even though he's been a little bit better than some of these other guys that they've been sending out there. Hellickson's a free agent. I mean, it's hard to look at anyone at AAA right now. I mean, my goodness, they've designated a lot of these guys for assignment, and they've outrighted them to Norfolk. So I don't know how they're going to fill out half their starting rotation. I mean, you said it. They're based on what we've seen them do historically. They're going to find this year's Giovanni Gallardo, or this offseason's Giovanni Gallardo. They're going to find, they'll find a trade to acquire another Wade Miley type, and they'll try to see if that's good enough. So, the Machado thing, the Zach Britton thing, it's always worth monitoring, but based on the way they proceeded at this trade deadline, if you're going to ask me to bet one way or the other, I'm going to guess Machado's certainly here. Maybe they trade Zach Britton because he's going to be commanding somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million a year in the final year of club control. So, maybe you find a trade partner there if he finishes up strong here. And, Zach Britton's pitched well of late. He's looked more like Zach Britton. So I don't think it's a case where there's no value for him whatsoever. I think there could be really good value for him, especially if one of these teams in the playoffs has a bullpen meltdown, and maybe you try to take advantage there. But beyond that, there isn't a whole lot to decide other than what the heck are you going to do about your starting rotation, and that's been the annual question for these Orioles, whether they've been in the playoffs or whether they've been in a position where it looks like they're going to be on the outside looking in, like it's certainly shaping up to be now.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. We've been talking about the Orioles. Anything else you want to pile on the Orioles? Because, I don't know that we're going to have a whole lot more Oriole conversations here over the next couple of weeks of tremendous relevance. Clearly it's football season around here now, right?
Well, I mean, there's still talk about the baseball team. I mean, there's a lot that could happen from Austin Hayes goes nuts. They start playing him a little bit more. You see what happens there. But, the biggest thing in baseball, I've been amazed just to watch the ebbs and flows of this season in general. I mean, look at the Los Angeles Dodgers, who had an absolutely historic run, and now they've lost 11 games in a row. I mean, they had a run that eclipsed the 1984 Detroit Tigers. They had the best run over a stretch of 50 or 60 games that we've seen in 100 years.
And did a lot of it without their ace, by the way, too.
Right. And now they've lost 11 games in a row. And then on the flip side, you have the Cleveland Indians who, were so mediocre, kind of just treading water for the first, probably close to two-thirds of the season, and they've won 19 games.
And they're going to be the 1 seed now, and Houston had the Storm, right? I mean, it's been quite a roller coaster. And look at the Cubs. The Cubs, nobody has talked about them. Nobody will talk about them. What if they get a 1-0 lead, in the first series against the Nationals or whatever? Then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, we'll be talking about the Cubs again next month. We haven't talked about them in 5 months, right?
Right. I mean, and the Cubs, it's not as though they've locked up that division. The Cardinals and the Brewers are still hanging around. But they had kind of gotten to the point where they were 14, 15 games over 500, and they have a current 3-game losing streak. It is such a weird season with these streaks. And you don't have to tell me. I mean, I've been a baseball fan my whole life. I mean, we know that teams, even the best teams, go through some rough patches. But for the Dodgers to be doing what they've been doing over the last couple weeks on the heels of an absolutely historic run, as you pointed out, with Clayton Kershaw being sidelined for a good portion of that, I mean, it's incredible. And as much as no one's paying attention to them because of that division, because they're so far out, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were not a good baseball team last year, they're lying in the weeds waiting to pounce at 22 games above 500. So,
and that game's going to be in their place. The wild card
absolutely.
Game. Yeah.
I mean, whether it's the Rockies, whether it's the Cardinals, whoever ends up getting that second wild card, they're going to be playing Arizona. So there's just as much as we've kind of looked at the Orioles, and there's just been a lot of mediocrity. There just haven't been that. Since the 22-10 start, they haven't had any extended periods of prosperity. Yes, they had the winning streak recently. Yes, they got themselves back over 500. They got to the 3-game above 500 mark. We just haven't seen them excel with any level of extended consistency since the early portion of the season. But you got a lot of other teams who there's some interesting things going on. I mean, the Indians chasing history. You mentioned Houston. They pick up Justin Verlander, but they clearly haven't been quite the same. And I think it's tough for them because they got out to such a huge lead so early. We kind of saw this with the 1997 Orioles a little bit when they got out to the lead they did. It's tough to maintain that when you don't have someone pushing you every day, when you're not having to look at the standings. But they've lost 4 in a row. They need to get themselves trending in the right direction going into October. So lots of good stories. You got a potential Cinderella in the Minnesota Twins, who lost over 100 games last year and right now still sitting in that second wild card spot. Even if the Orioles aren't involved, certainly this is a postseason I'm going to be looking forward to. So maybe even if we don't have as much discussion about the Orioles, I get the sense we're going to still be talking about plenty of compelling storylines going into October in Major League Baseball.
Oh, we're getting to the end of the Ubaldo Jimenez years here in Baltimore. I will shed a tear. Orioles in Toronto for a couple, on to New York this weekend. Of course, we are on to London next week. Luke is going to get his passport stamped as well over at Heathrow. We're throwing a big party next Saturday at the Fox at XL in the Docklands, East London area. All the information up at WNST.net. You can always email me, nasty@WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. If you're a Ravens fan, come on out to Carroll County on Wednesday night. We will be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry. Ryan Jensen, I keep wanting to say Alex Jensen. Ryan Jensen, that's Alex Lewis. Ryan Jensen and Austin Howard will be joining us on Wednesday night. Wow, I'm a mess this morning. And that's at Greenmount Station with Crab Cakes. That's this Wednesday. And you can look up Greenmount Station online. If you have not been there, have not had the Crab Cakes, join us on Wednesday at 7:30. It'll be a good time. So a couple of events coming up here, including our golf tournament this week with our friends at Roost Chris for There Goes My Hero. And anything you miss here this week, you can find in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox digitally each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month, 25 cents to get involved there now after 25 years. It is PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, any breaking news, any ups, any downs, injury updates from the Ravens, the Orioles moving guys around. You'll get it all first on the WNST Tech Service. That is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, getting you ready for a weekend of football. And, of course, the Cleveland Browns coming to Baltimore this week. We're going to talk a lot of Browns football as well as a little bit of Tribe and some other stuff with some of our Cleveland friends, which we always enjoy. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.